Last week we raised and answered one question: what is a worldview? I want to follow that up this morning with a second related question: how do we get our worldviews? We see how important a worldview is. It is what controls us. It is us in the true sense of the word. What your worldview is, that is you. People will pay lip homage to something. Well, I believe this or I believe that. And all you have to do is take a look at their life. And looking at their life is the best way to be informed. What does that person really believe? We can take an example that we've used so many times here in this church of the old typical denoms, the denominational system. They tell us with that old sweet saccharine smile on their face, I love Jesus and I want to be good and I believe I'm going to heaven and I've accepted him as my Savior, and all of that religious nonsense. I believe the Bible. And all you have to do is look at their life. You see, it's really easy to say words, to mutter words, to pay lip homage to something. All you have to do is look at their life, and their life will tell you what they believe. You'll find out whether they believe the Word of God by how they live in their life. So we want to ask the question, we see how important a worldview is. How do we get our worldviews? Now, Francis Schaeffer, in one short sentence, I think, has said it all. He wrote as follows: most people catch their presuppositions from their family and surrounding society, pardon the example he has to use here, the way a child catches measles. In other words, it's not that difficult to get a worldview. Just grow up in the world. That's a quote from Francis Schaeffer. Most people catch their worldviews, their presuppositions, from their family and surrounding society the way a child catches measles. Since we know now from last week's study that all cultures have their own worldview and each person in that culture has it, I don't think it's any surprise to learn how they got it, by sharing. The culture, the society, the family, the institution in which that person grows up or around which that person grows up will simply share its worldview, or as we've seen more often than not, its worldviews, plural, with all of its members. A society can't even exist without a worldview, because the worldview is the glue that holds the society together. If we were all trying to go in any country institution in 100 different directions at the same time, and we all had equal authority to choose the direction in which we went and to enforce that, we'd never get anywhere. And that's why this country doesn't go too many places today. A lot of people have a lot of different notions of what to do, and no one seems to have the authority to enforce it. But we have enough authority to enforce things here that the country stays together. Whenever you lose your worldview, or you have too many inroads of too many different types of worldview, you lose the coherence of it all. You lose the consistency of your culture, your family, your home, your church, or whatever institution we're talking about, or the individual. And they lose that worldview that they had earlier, and something else is substituted in its place. So we could say that the glue is the worldview. In 1 Corinthians 1:10, Paul is arguing for a Christian worldview when he tells the church at Corinth, all of you, if you want to be the body of Christ and continue to exist, you'll all have to think and do and believe the same thing. That's essentially true, although you don't have to have as much unity in other groups as you do in the church of the Lord. That's essentially true in every institution or organization, to use those terms, if I may. You've got to have agreement on what's going on if you want to stay together. So to be more specific this morning, we don't want to talk about all the cultures of the world, what their worldviews are. We want to talk about our culture. That's where we live and where we're growing up, our society in the old U.S. of A. So what about our culture and society as far as its worldview, parenthesis S in parenthesis views, worldviews, our country and its worldview is concerned? Well, unlike perhaps any other society known from history, America is often spoken of under this metaphor as the great melting pot. You ever heard of that metaphor used for this country before? That has its pluses and minuses, I might say. Being a great melting pot, what that is saying is that we have a huge diversity of peoples which bring with them a huge diversity of ideologies with them to this country. And what America is supposed to do is blend all of it together. America has sometimes been more, sometimes less successful in doing that. It has its pluses because there is only one right, correct worldview, and what if we in America didn't have it? Then if we've got enough immigrants coming into the country with enough different worldviews, hopefully one of them, sooner or later, will have the right worldview. It has its pluses. It has its minuses. Think of the confusion that it produces. One country that is not, and I'm not saying that we don't have one dominant worldview, I think that we do, but we are unique in history, there's no question about this, that we have opened our doors. We're not an indigenous people. The only people that are legally here are the American Indians. Amen. The rest of us are trespassers here. A huge variety of people have come here from all different types of cultures and societies and religious faiths and ideologies, all these things, your worldviews, from their background. We come to America and we're trying to melt all of this in the great melting pot. So our culture is not uniform with one single definable worldview. And I think this is even less so today than in this country's past. Our culture is not one uniform, single, definable worldview. Communist countries, for example, are much more uniform in everything that they do and think than we are here in this country. Take the Chinese, for example. In China, they all have to wear the same clothes. Everybody has to wear the same clothes. Different levels of society, you have to wear the clothes that identify you as part of that society. That keeps all the diversity out. That keeps a lot of unity and uniformity in. Our country is not like this. It's a huge melting pot that has so many different inroads of various philosophies which have made their way here. The black Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall had this to say concerning the Negro people, which are their own. That's one particular group here in this country. Thurgood Marshall had this to say: I've come to the definite conclusion that if the United States is indeed the great melting pot, the Negro either didn't get in the pot or didn't get melted down. This theory of we're one great melting pot is only partially true. It has served its purpose in this country, that metaphor, a melting pot, where we do seem to melt and blend different ideologies. But yet at the same time, with so many different immigrants, and we're all immigrants, that have come into this country, we all create our own culture within a culture. It's a melting pot culture that has little touches and dashes of various ideologies and worldviews. But yet there are so many cultures within the culture, though. For instance, this country is often spoken of with this acronym. See if you don't remember what this means. What does that mean? WASP. Why? All right, so here it identifies the color of our skin. You know, we're Caucasians. We're not yellow, we're not red, we're not brown, we're not black. Well, this officially and earlier was a colony of England. And so the first people over here were basically English people that came. Now you get up into the 19th century with the huge inroads of the immigrants into this country, and of course you'll remember, maybe you don't, but Congress had to pass numerous laws putting a quota, and they're still in existence today, on how many different immigrants can come into this country. We were being swallowed up by the Poles and by the Italians, and earlier in that part of the century by the Germans, just being swallowed up by them. So what we're supposed to be is we all have English roots. I mean, we're Anglo-Saxons. And what about the last term? Oh, religion. This is a Protestant country. I mean, Italy's not Protestant. I don't think that's a Protestant country over there. Or Mexico, or the Central American countries, or South American countries, Protestant. White, Anglo-Saxon Protestant. But, I mean, there are a whole lot of different subgroups that don't fit with this color of the skin, or with this national heritage, or with this religious persuasion. You ever heard of Irish Catholics before? Well, what have we done here? We've done this. We've joined two different things. National heritage, the Irish. They're Roman Catholics. Boston's a stronghold. Or what about German Lutherans? I think that's where Luther was from. You ever heard of these subgroups, a group within a group, German Lutherans, or Scandinavians, or Irish Catholics, and so forth? Let me just give you, I've already given you a couple, but let's go into a little more detail with some subcultures in this country, just for an example. Some subcultures, which are an attempt to show you how confusing it can be living in a melting pot. Well, we don't have one uniform, single, definable worldview that we can put a name tag on. Now, I think there's an umbrella worldview in this country, and we'll get to what that is later. But it's a combination, and it's been affected by other things. But some subcultures, the immigrants that create a culture within a culture. Well, let's start with that. Let's start with an ethnic description. An ethnic description. Take, for instance, the blacks. The blacks live so differently than the whites. They are different, if you'll pardon the expression, breed of people. They're of a different color, if you'll pardon the expression again. They are entirely different than white people are. And there are so many differences within the black community. If you just travel very short distance from the black community, let's say, of Vicksburg, Mississippi, and the black community of Gary, Indiana, of Detroit, of Chicago, there's all the difference in the world. The 1950s and 1960s, there was a great migration of the black people from the deep south, from places like Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi, to the big northern industrial towns, looking for better work, better pay, better opportunities in life, like Gary, Indiana, or Chicago, or Detroit. Three well-known, really two, Gary's almost part of Chicago, two well-known places where blacks have gone. So what we're saying is that blacks have created their own subculture. Their music is a different music than ours. Some people are glad they've given us the blues and the rhythm music and everything. A white person can't even keep tune with all of that good African mumbo-jumbo dance and hip music. Whites had to learn that from blacks. I mean, whites, they had to pick up. And I don't mean to be too crude here, but you've never known a white person who can dance like a black person. You've never known a white person who can dance like a black person, not a black person. Something in them. I don't mean that critically. I mean there's just something in them. They're a culture within a culture. Or they can keep a beat or a tune. Most of us that get confused just playing spoons on our knees. The blacks can seem to do it all. They can keep rhythm to everything, and their rhythm is different than our rhythm. And they gave us the blues music and the rhythm music. So they are different people. The way they think, the way they live, the way, some people would say, the way they care for themselves and the way they care for their children. And so you're living, well, maybe not here, but I mean in this country, you're living around black people everywhere, the Negro people. So you're representing one culture within a culture, and they're representing another culture within a culture, and yet both of you live side by side, so you're brushing up against each other's shoulders. Something is rubbing off on each other. It's a melting pot then, but melting pots can also produce a lot of confusion. Or take another ethnic subculture. See, I know a lot about the blacks from being in the South. Man, they just thought different. Man, I even use their word. Man, they just think differently than we do. I remember this, whenever I was back in 6th, okay, enough on that. That's probably where I got a lot. See, I was raised there. I get my words, my way of maybe thinking or saying things. I won't take that any further, but I didn't get anything else from them. I don't be thinking anything that I got that I didn't get. Back in the 7th grade, I had my best friend. This was interesting in being raised in the Deep South in Mississippi. I never had a problem with the black people. My best friends oftentimes were blacks. The whites were, they were too white for me. I don't know. They were too stiff. I enjoyed being with a lot of the black people. So my best friend of that year, the 7th grade, was a black boy whose name happened to be Johnny Walker. And I remember, you know how we kidded him with his poor name, but that was my best friend, and so I wanted him to spend the night with me. I didn't think there was anything wrong. I didn't see any problems with color of the skin, but see, my father was from the north. He's a Yankee who's moved to the South and married a Southern girl. The rest of us are kind of accustomed to that. He's not accustomed to that, and to this day, my father has big racial problems. The black people are inferior. If you ask him that, he'll say, no, they're not inferior. And if you ask him, would you let one live next door to you? No. Well, I thought they weren't inferior. They value my property down. We know about that. They moved in next door to us, and we lost value in our home. And we barely got out of that neighborhood before the prices just went through the cellar. They did sell their home for double what they paid for it, but you should have been able to get a lot more than that. But we had blacks living right beside us. And so, I didn't have any problem with the blacks. I guess occasionally maybe some of my father's racial views, and I guess that could be explained due to where he was from the north, a Yankee transplanted down to the south, rubbed off on me. Whenever those blacks, I'm getting off on another story, I'll get back with Johnny Walker in a minute, moved in next door to us, I had a dog that lived with me. He slept with me, did everything with me. I had him for, 12 years. Finally just grew old. I mean, so old all his hair fell off of him. This is after I lived in Vermont, as a matter of fact. He's a long-haired dog, and his hair just fell off of him, just like an old possum is what he looked like. His name was Gomez, and oh, he was the best friend, the friend of all friends, is my literal view of that hound that I had, a collie, Spitz, Labrador Retriever mix. People called him a mongrel, but I named those three names to make sure you knew he wasn't a mongrel. You could at least name the names. You could at least recognize three breeds in him. But he finally just fell over just dead. I mean, he just fell over dead. But anyway, the blacks moved into the neighborhood, and that was my dog. He went with me everywhere. And dogs, I don't know, if they're raised by white people, don't seem to like black people for some reason. And he was like a police dog that would go with me everywhere. And I sicked him on the little girl next door, little helpless girl. I'm so sorry that I did it when I think back on it, but I just did it for fun. She came out and she wasn't bothering me. I said, get her. He tore after her and tore into that girl. And we barely escaped without a lawsuit against us. You could have heard me a block away when my dad got home that night. Oh, boy. I remember that. They didn't sue us. They had all the right to. They would have won, too. It was without any cause. I just wanted to do it. I just thought it was neat to have a dog that was trained to sick anybody around you. I sicked him on my white friends, too. But I sicked him on a little helpless black girl, and he really tore into her. So we had to pay the hospital and doctor bills, but escaped the lawsuit. But anyway, getting back to Johnny Walker, I wanted him to spend the night. And, oh, my father was opposed to that. You can't have a black person. Oh, what's the difference? Just a human being. He's been out in the sun a little longer than the rest of us, but that's the only difference. That's the way I looked at it. So what we were going to do is we were going to go to our cabin that we had down Mississippi on Sardis Lake, and we were driving a pickup truck. You're kind of confined in a pickup truck, all in the cab, myself, my father, and my friend Johnny Walker. And I didn't find out about this until afterwards. And my dad, whenever he got out of the pickup truck, he just about passed out. He'd been closing there with what he called that odor that was in the truck that I didn't recognize. He just about passed out whenever he got out, having been closed up in there. It was wintertime, and he had to keep the windows rolled up. And then the statement to me was, well, see, that's your problem, son, is you're being raised around all these people. You don't even recognize it anymore. You've been immunized to all of this now. And so the next year we were taken out of that school and put in a private school with all white people. So anyway, the blacks, different type of lifestyle and thinking. Take secondly the Hispanics. Do you know that it is estimated that 2 years from now, just 1990, the Hispanics will make up the largest minority group in the United States? The blacks have been. But the Spanish people are flooding our southwestern states, coming across the Rio Grande, into Texas, into Arizona, into New Mexico, coming by boat into Miami, into New Orleans from Central and South America. I'm sure you've read the stories about this. They are flooding this country. Most of them illegal aliens is that technical governmental term, illegal aliens that are just flooding in. Now big important cities like San Antonio, Texas, has a well-known, highly educated, very efficient mayor who is a Hispanic. And it'll probably just be down the road before you see Houston and Dallas and Fort Worth and those cities there. As I said in a recent message, that part, Texas especially, southern Texas, you have to be bilingual to even live there, because half the people speak Spanish and half the people speak English. You have to be bilingual to even get along down there. And a lot of these states, such as Texas, Louisiana, Florida, the people who are still in control of the big wheels and machine of government, the English-speaking WASPs here, are wanting to pass laws to put on the books that English is the official state language. They're afraid of what's going to happen if too many of these Spanish people keep coming into the country. That part of the country, just taking things over. They're illegal aliens. They shouldn't be in the country. It's against the law. But again, I kind of find it a little humorous why Americans are so opposed to so-called minorities, since that's what all of us are. We're all minorities. The only people that are legitimately here are the Indians, and now what are they? They're minorities now. We look down on the people that truly own the country here. I find it a little ironic, to say the least. I think that they probably do have a good point, though. I'm anti-minority and these ethnic subgroups in this sense that whenever they come into this country, they're always arguing for their own ethnic rights. They're always arguing like for their own native language and their native this and their native that. You know, I would say if you want to come into this country, which is a country of the great melting pot, now this is just like, you know, speaking as an American, not as a Christian, you've got to give up all of that stuff and blend in with the rest of us. We're not going to give you your own Spanish newspaper down there, and your Spanish food, and your Spanish this, and your Spanish that. I find it a little ironic, again, to find people who are illegally entering this country crying out for their minority rights all the time. We're all minorities. You have to surrender your German language and your Spanish language and your French and learn English if you want to live here. I get a little irate over the articles you see in the newspapers and magazines all the time of the Hispanics and so forth wanting this, that, and the other, always written in Spanish for them. If you're going to come here to become an American, if you're going to come here to participate in all the economic and social freedom of this country, you got to give something in return. You got to become an American. That would be my argument if I was in government. If you want to come as a black Hispanic, but you've got to give up your voodoo and all your nonsense and become an American. 2 years away is that date, 1990. Hispanics will make up the largest minority in this country. See, I want you to know that I'm not anti-minority from a Christian point of view, and I'm not anti-minority from an American point of view, since we're all minorities. But I would think that if this is America, if you want to speak Spanish and keep dealing in pesos, then stay down south then. If you want to have all the freedoms that you get in this country, you have to give your pesos and your Spanish up then. Eventually, you're going to have to give all of that up and become an American. I think that's only fair. But that's just speaking from a point of fairness or justice. Here's the third example. The Asians. The Asians are coming, they tell us. The Chinese, the Korean, the Indo-Chinese, like Cambodians, and especially these boatloads of Vietnamese, and to a much, much lesser extent, the Japanese. The Japanese are a proud people. They stay in their own country, except when they want to come over here and steal some secrets from us or sell some goods to us, radios and cars and things like that. The Chinese, the Korean, the Indo-Chinese, that's what I mean by Asian. They have the potential of changing the entire educational scene in America. The brightest minds in this country are often from Asia, especially in the so-called precise sciences. Showing you what's taking place in a melting pot, maybe Thurgood Marshall was right. The Negro either didn't get in the pot or didn't get melted down. I think he's in the pot if he lives here, but it's difficult to melt down every culture to blend with another. You really don't. You've always got cultures within a culture and subcultures and sub-subcultures there. Listen to these statistics here. They're coming to our schools, colleges and universities, graduate schools in record numbers. The freshman class of 1987, last year, the freshman class of 1987, listen to this, At Brown, some of these major important American universities, at Brown, 9% of the freshman class of 1987 was Asian. At Harvard, 14%. Right across the street at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, 20% of the freshman class is Asian. That means Chinese, Korean, Indo-Chinese. Now all of that is on the other side of the globe. You hadn't only skipped the Pacific, you've skipped over this country from the west to the east coast. Let's go back to the west coast now and see what's going on over there. How about at CIT? Not as well known as MIT, but it's the same. California Institute of Technology, CIT, 21%. 21% of the freshman class of 1987 Asian. And then here's a school that tops them all off, that hotbed of student rebellion of the 60s, the University of California at Berkeley. 25%, 1/4 of the freshman class, the undergraduate freshman class at University of California at Berkeley, Asian. And if that's not enough, these people aren't coming over here and then failing out of school. These people are coming over here and passing all of these WASPs up academically. You know, the typical idea of the Asian whenever he came over here was, well, let's see, I think he owns a laundromat, San Francisco, and he runs that during the evening because most of the day you can find him in the back of the shop piled on a big old top of dirty clothes smoking an opium pipe. Well, long ago, those stereotypes have been done away with because these people who owned laundromats and worked and built the American railroad system of the West have long since traded in their opium pipes and railroad boots for, well, diplomas at our universities. Last year, 55% of engineering doctorates went to Asians. More than half of the doctorates taken in this country in engineering, more than half of them went to Asians. And listen to this, at Penn State, the figure was 74%. 3 out of 4 students who took a doctorate of engineering at Penn State were Asians. I should know, whenever I was in school, my last year, I believe, let's see. Yeah, I believe that was my last year in college. I was on the graduate floor of the dorm, although I wasn't in graduate school. I went up there so I could do what you came to school for, to study, not to party or whatever. And you go up there with the graduate students, and that's what they're doing. And I had a graduate student. He was a graduate student in electrical engineering. Where do you think he was from? Asia. Sure, Ching Chong or whatever his name was. He was from Asia. Sure enough, and the halls were filled with them. People there working for degrees in mathematics or computer science or, more than anything, engineering. And what do we find? Over half of the doctorates taken in this country last year in engineering were given to Asians. Now, I guess you see where that would lead then. Guess what? A lot of these people don't go back home and, work in rice paddies. It's called the brain drain on Asia. Those people, they've tasted affluent society here. And they come over here and use our resources to get their degrees and decide to stay here. A Midwestern University president estimates that in 4 years, 1992, somewhere between 75 and 93% of engineering professors in America will be Asian. That's almost 100% is his estimate, up to 93% of professors of engineering in engineering schools, like at Penn State, which has a well-known engineering school, will be Asians. I mean, that's a little frightening from an American point of view. Think what these people can do when all of the high-up positions in education and in business and so forth are controlled by the Asians, because they're the brightest ones. Because we've entered a number-crunching society, and no one can crunch numbers like the Asians can. We Americans, we get confused on our birthday. These guys can crunch numbers. I mean, they can do it way beyond most of us who are Americans. I know they can do it better than I can. Some of these guys, I've got the reports at home. I mean, you can give them a number like, just like this. Let me do it for you, and we'll see if we got any people that are Asian in here. Add this number in your mind. 1,418. Add that to 1,744,264. They've got it, just like that. I can guarantee you they've got it. No, not all of them. You can't just go over there and pull a guy off a rice paddy and say, now, subtract, subtract. Uno ching chong, I don't know. They can do that. It's amazing. Subtract huge numbers, multiply terms. I mean, multiply like 4-digit terms with a 3-digit term. Most of us can do it on a calculator. No, most of us can do it on a piece of paper. A 4-digit term, multiply that, and we're not going to give you until next Sunday now to do it. In your mind, with a 3-digit term, maybe you're better than I am, but I know I don't think any of us are as good as these Asians are. So from an American point of view, I think that is a little frightening. I think they're going to control mathematics and computers, anything that deals with numbers, engineering, chemical engineering, electrical engineering, all types of engineers out there. These guys are really going up. So there's one set of subcultures, the ethnic subcultures, here in this great melting pot of America. Let me give you another example, another group of subcultures, the economic subcultures of this country. Now, the economists have many different ways of listing the subgroups of economics, but I think one that probably you're most familiar with reads like this. I'll give it to you in shorthand. LLMLULLMMUMLUMUUU. Let me try that up here for you. I have to write it down to make sure I don't get confused. Well, who knows what that means? Surely you all know what that means. Lower, lower, middle, lower. I mean, this is all lower class. This is all middle class. This is all upper class. You didn't know that? Yeah, that's the chief way, the kind of the lay way. You got 9 subdivisions. Lower, lower, middle, lower. I mean, this is all lower class. This is all middle class. This is all upper class. You didn't know that? Yeah, that's the chief way, the kind of the lay way. You got 9 subdivisions of economic order here in this country. Lower, lower class, middle, lower class, upper, lower class. That means that you're lower class, but you're upper in the lower class. Lower, middle, 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 upper, middle. Lower, upper, middle, upper, and then none of us are here. Upper, upper. Upper, upper. That's like 500,000 and above a year. Upper, upper class. Now, how do you like that? And see, all of us fit in all these different places here. So we've got all of this division in this country. And then maybe an Asian, fits right here, and then a black fits right here. So now we've got different countries and origins, and maybe it's a Protestant that fits here and a Roman Catholic that fits over here. And maybe you're a Roman Catholic that fits here, and you're from Ireland, and, we can just start multiplying it. Look at all the various workings, like a spider web, of cultures within a culture. So here's one listing of 9 subdivisions from lower, lower class to upper, upper class of the economic order in this country. You see, in most countries, it's more uniform. You maybe have 3 classes, but you've got only 3, not 3 within the 3. Or maybe only 2 classes, the poor people and the rich people. But not so in this country. All divided up. Different educational skills and levels and abilities and so forth. Now, even if you can identify your ethnic, your social, your economic, we're saying that a person catches or picks up their worldview just by living in the world, like a child catches a cold. Even if you can sit here and identify, now your ethnic, what's my ethnic? Religious, denominational background, your social, economic, your political, so forth, all of that, the backgrounds in that area, even if you can identify that, the subculture in which you live, that still isn't enough. to understand all of the influences that surround us. Even if you're not white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, if you're something else, or a combination of various things, and you can identify what you are, everything from your ethnic background to your political persuasion, then that's still not enough to understand all that influences you, because there is such a wide variety of things which influence us. For instance, you get one set of ideas, and we're just speaking in general here, maybe not to you, but you get one set of ideas in church, another set of ideas in school, perhaps another set of ideas at home. Remember, meanwhile, you're supposed to be making some sense. The worldview is how you see yourself and how you explain your world. You're trying to make some sense out of all this. One value system is espoused by television shows such as Dallas and Dynasty. Another value system espoused by The Cosby Show and Little House on the Prairie. It all comes over television. Chariots of Fire has its slant, and Scarface has its. Motion pictures like The Sound of Music have one type of influence on you. Motion pictures like Friday the 13th and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre have another influence on you. And yet people often watch both. Evie sings one type of music and Prince another. The Blackwood brothers have their slant and Twisted Sister have theirs. Norman Rockwell has his paintings, and Picasso and Andy Warhol have theirs. And yet we live in this great free country. So here's what I want to come to this morning. Whenever you see all that you have taking place around you, all of the influences around you, and the way Bible-believing people usually respond to this follows a three-step pattern. And I even mean yourself, too. The way Bible-believing people usually respond to this, as well as the world at large, or America at large, I might say, follows what we could describe as a three-step pattern. Number one, confusion. People have sung the praises of America for being a great melting pot. But a great melting pot produces a lot of confusion. Because you're given so many options. It's like going into a supermarket or picking up the wish book from Sears, Roebuck, or Montgomery Ward. You're given so many options. Options oftentimes produce confusion. Now, I know the people of this country would say, well, I like that better than the communists who don't give you an option except the one they want you to believe, which happens to be a false, detrimental one. Well, that's true. I'm not arguing that communism is better than a democracy. I think both of them are bad. They're both bad in different areas. The communists are terrible. Their worldview is a terrible worldview. But is our worldview any better in this country with all the various options that produce confusion? Here's what I mean by confusion, and you experience this as a Christian, that we have a very hard time distinguishing the noises around us, the voices calling for our attention. As I say, Evie has her music and Prince his, and sometimes people listen to both. That's going to produce confusion in your life. We have a very hard time distinguishing the noises around us, voices around us. Now you see, maybe you're not thinking too well with me, or maybe you're so much a part of America, it's not registering on you how confusing this country could be. So let me give you three examples. Let's pretend we weren't part of this country. Let's pretend we were aliens from outer space. Now what would you think an alien would think? I'll just give you three places. If he landed at one of three places, either the Super Bowl, the New York Stock Exchange, or a freeway in Los Angeles. What do you think he would think's going on? What's going on down here? The Super Bowl, the New York Stock Exchange. You've seen how that operates. Or you have the danger of losing your life on a freeway in L.A. See, we kind of just grow up with that. Well, it's just dog eats dog. It's whoever's got the biggest 45 or 44 Magnum with them, and whoever's got the heaviest foot on the pedal, that's the one that gets to work on time in L.A. We're just used to that. You just got to go out there and fight with the wolves. Aliens would come down and, shouldn't we make some sense out of this, some order? Why can't we, tear down wherever the corporations are and build them in the neighborhood where all the people work, where all the people live that work at that corporation, so that you just walk across the street and you go to the place that you work. And so we can just tear up all the interstates and do away with that. I think there's got to be a better way. I doubt that's it, but surely an alien from outer space would come down and say, this is utter confusion at the Super Bowl, a freeway in L.A., or the stock exchange. You almost have to put yourself in an out-of-the-body experience to realize what's going on around you. That this is a very confusing society here that has so many different value systems that are calling for our attention. So there's the first step. You're trying to be raised as a human being here, and you get one type of show with Cosby and Little House, and another thing entirely with Dallas and Dynasty. It's something entirely different, but it comes across the same Antichrist box, the old television set. And a child grows up watching both of those, or he watches cartoons, which just all make-believe, and then he watches, on Tuesday night a documentary on the Vietnam War, which is real life, as he would think. Well, how do you make sense of all of that then? Confusion. First step. Second step. Chaos results after confusion. See, this has happened with all of us. It happens when you attempt to believe the Word of God. And yet you're living here in this world. Chaos. One writer has this to say about our so-called melting pot and the pots that each of us have as Christians. Our pot has a dash of faith and a dash of skepticism. We are at once religious and secular. We believe in God sometimes. Our religion has elements of superstition at some times and is tempered by sober science at other times. We are at the same time Christians and card-carrying pragmatists. Can you imagine Paul ordering something on a credit card? Calling up on a telephone, ordering something with a card number? He'd carry a little, beef along with him and exchange it for whatever he wanted. So at once we're Christians, at the same time we're card-carrying pragmatists. On Sunday we say the creed. On Monday we are fatalists. We try to separate our religious life from the rest of our life. We live by holding contradictory beliefs. Living in contradiction can be exciting. Life is surely more than logic, but the contradictory life is a confusing life, a life of inconsistency and incoherence. Its bottom line is chaos. And that's kind of where we are with this gospel of secularism that has been so dominant of late in this country. Amen. Because what the secularists are telling us, if they deny the existence of God, if they deny the special creation of man, if they deny life after death, then you've reduced everything to meaninglessness. There is no meaning. There is no meaning to life. If there's no meaning to your origin, if there's no meaning to you after you die, if there's no meaning to the planets, to the stars, to the sun, to the earth, if there's no meaning to the rise and fall of nations, then you have reduced life to meaninglessness, or to say it another way, chaos. Another writer has this to say: a number of signs indicate that the proverbial baby has been thrown out with the bathwater. Secular people are left without any ultimate meaning in life. Can material things really satisfy the hunger of a soul? Will constant care of the body fulfill the needs of a spirit? See, we do have a spirit in us. The question is worth pressing because one of the striking features of today's secular society is moral anarchy, violence, sensuality, dishonesty, crime. I'm not suggesting that we ought to encourage religion just to get people to behave. My point lies in another direction. If the secular gospel were really what it is touted to be, a guarantee of contentment and happiness, then why all the restlessness and rage in America? If the ethic of secularism is really it, then why hasn't it solved our problems? Christians are not alone in pointing out this contemporary bewilderment. The bafflement of modern man's soul is one of the recurring themes in 20th century novels and plays. Franz Kafka, D.H. Lawrence, Henry Miller, and Samuel Beckett would never be accused of Christian prejudices, and yet they speak powerfully of the emptiness of men and women without faith. Similar testimony comes from internationally known psychiatrist Carl Jung, once said, and this is a quote, a famous quote from Jung, "The central neurosis of our time is emptiness." The central neurosis. You've heard of Jung. I mean, he ranks with Freud. Carl Jung, J-U-N-G. The central neurosis of our time is emptiness. See, if secularism is so right, it tells you to grab for all the sensuality, all the bodily pleasure you can get. But I would think that sooner or later, we're going to reach a point of fulfillment in secularism and sensuality. But it's like a dog chasing his tail. It's a vicious, endless circle. The central neurosis of our time, with all of our money, with all of our pleasure time, with all of our boats and water skis and fishing tackle and exercise equipment, the central neurosis of the time is emptiness. Nothing is fulfilling. And that should say something loudly and clearly to secular man today, that there is more to man than his body. There is a soul, an eternal soul and spirit to him that can never be satisfied with water skiing every afternoon. We've been sold that, you see. It goes back to advertising. We've been sold that by the advertisers. Maybe you were, raised like I was in Memphis. There's not a sea or ocean within hundreds of miles of you. But you got to think about water. We'll build some man-made lakes, and all the lakes in Mississippi are all man-made. What are they made for? Well, they say, flood control. Well, yeah, but how about fishing and skiing and camping and boating too, though? And that's what the advertisers sell you. Nothing wrong with going out and fishing some, but secular man is told that's where life is. And secular man sits at his office and thinks, oh, if I could water ski every afternoon, it'd just be like heaven. And you know what? Go ahead and try it. After a while, it's just boredom. It's complete boredom and emptiness. It can only fulfill a little tiny, tiny part in your psyche or in your soul. The rest of it stays a huge empty vacuum. Another psychiatrist had this to say. Clinics, he wrote, are crowded with people suffering from a new kind of neurosis, a sense of total and ultimate meaninglessness of life. The frustration comes because man has an inherent tendency to reach out for meanings to fulfill and values to actualize. No physician, however, back to this man's writing himself, has diagnosed the sickness of the soul without faith any more profoundly than the ancient Hebrew author of Ecclesiastes. You see, rather than going to Jung or Freud or D.H. Lawrence or Samuel Beckett, you can go to the Word of God. And you won't find a more beautiful exposition of the whole matter of what is life and what is life's meaning than from the sacred Hebrew writer, Jewish writer of the book of Ecclesiastes. So our second step here is confusion, or chaos. Confusion produces chaos, which thirdly, and this is then where we live, produces inconsistency. Produces inconsistency. We're confused, we live in chaos, we become inconsistent in our judgment. We live, act, think, feel, respond to all the stimuli coming to us, but we're not certain why we respond the way we do. You can ask most Americans, why do you do this? And a lot of them will say, I really don't know. After you get beyond the, well, it feels good, which is no answer, why do you do it? I really don't know. We live, we act, we think, we exist in this world. In response to all the stimuli around us, but we don't know why we do what we do. We don't know in this country and culture where Christianity ends and paganism begins. You know, I had that statement down here in my notes that we don't know where Christianity ends and, worldliness or demonism begins. And then I noticed in one of Multnoma's critical concern books by Alcorn entitled Christians in the Wake of the Sexual Revolution, he has 4 parts in the table of contents. And guess what the first part was entitled? I just saw this the other day. Where does the world end and the church begin? It's because of the confusion in the world that you don't know where one line stops and another whole ball game begins. And so if you don't know where that line is, what happens? You traffic back and forth across that line of demarcation into worldliness, back into the church. In the church, back into worldliness. You traffic back and forth across that line because you don't know where Christianity begins. You don't always know whether you are the one witnessing or the one being witnessed to in the world. You don't know whether you're the one who has the message or you're the one someone's trying to give the message to. One writer had this to say, the diversity and confusion are so great that for most of us, it seems the melting pot is found not so much in the culture, but in our own hands. And that the asparagus is getting stuck to the pasta. It's because of the society that we live in. We don't know where Christianity ends and demonism begins, so we traffic back and forth across the line. And let's take an issue that was an issue recently in this church concerning clothing. So you don't know. And so you wear something that you think is, this is conservative. Surely this is scriptural. And then after a while, you're looking around at others in the world and ads and magazines and catalogs and, so you buy something nicer than that. And then you get convicted. And so you put that up. And you go put your Christian clothes back on. And then you're dissatisfied. And you put that up and you put your worldly clothes back on. See, I can understand why these things happen. It's because we don't know where the line is. We don't know where the line is, where one stops and another begins. So what happens? We traffic back and forth across them all the time. If we're a Christian, we're not going to stay on the worldly side. We traffic back and forth across them. Sometimes worldly, sometimes saintly. Sometimes saintly, sometimes worldly. The melting pot, he said, it's not so much in our culture, it's in our own hand, and the asparagus is getting stuck to the pasta. A commentary I have on Ecclesiastes had this one little sentence that gives us our 3 steps, but in a different way. I gave you 3 more or less C's: confusion, chaos, inconsistency. I noticed after I had those notes ready, a commentary on Ecclesiastes gave it as 3 D's. The sentence said this: when values are in doubt, decisions are hard to make, and the resulting uncertainty leads to despair. So his 3 steps would be decision, you got to make a decision; doubt, you doubt it because of your value system; despair. 3 D's: decision, doubt, despair. You ever tried to make a decision? Now, is this ethical? Is this ethical? Or is it not ethical? There's your decision. And you're not really for sure. And so it produces despair. Oh, I just don't know what to do now. I don't know if this is right to wear, or this is an okay thing to do in life, or this is the appropriate job to have. When values are in doubt, decisions are hard to make, and the resulting uncertainty leads to despair. You see, as soon as you know and have your value system intact and complete, when your value system is intact, you can make decisions in, because you make your decisions on the basis of your value system, on the basis of your worldview. If your worldview is kind of a hodgepodge of everything mixed together, it's very difficult to even make decisions in. You don't know what to do. And that's why people are so empty and so despairing today. So where do we get our worldviews? Well, I think I've been saying. We live in a swirling melting pot here in this country, and we grab for things and fads and ideologies that are around us. Again, another writer had this to say, lost in our own culture, swirling around in the melting pot, while somebody else has his hand on the spoon. Our own culture is in control. It dictates what's going into the pot here. We just seem to be lost. Christians are lost in that pot, swirling around while someone else has their hand on the spoon. Someone else is dictating what gets mixed in and what doesn't, and what ideologies are going to be current today and which ones aren't. Now, let me conclude our study this morning entitled, How Do We Get Our Worldviews? I've just told you how we get them. You're not born with them, but you are raised with worldviews. And that's why we all come, because we come from different backgrounds. Well, I could say several things. That's why you have difficulties in any group to get the people in one accord. And then I would say also, and that's part of the miracle of the Christian faith and the Christian church, that we can come from so many different religious or ethnic or social or economic backgrounds. And as we work out things and get into alignment with the Word of God, come into agreement with one another. Different ages, different geographies where we're from, different subcultures. I came from a certain subculture, a southern culture. Most of you come from a northern culture. There are just different ways of even doing things, you know. I was telling my wife the other day, when we finally got some snow, my statement to her was, you know, it never snows when it's cold, not up north. It has to get warm enough before it'll snow. You've never seen it snow when it's 5 below. It has to get warm enough before it'll snow. That's what you say when you're up north. It has to get warm enough before it'll snow. When you're down south, you say it has to get cold enough before it'll snow. You notice that? See, I notice that because I've been both places, I guess. Then up here, everyone says, well, it's not warm enough yet to snow, is it? You know if the snow's coming down, praise God, the temperatures have gone up. You know, it's up into the 20s or the teens or something. Down south, you're always waiting for it to get cold enough, not warm enough, cold enough to snow. And so my mother called last night. I wasn't home. I stayed late at work and talked to my wife, and they got 13 inches of snow. I mean, if you get an inch down there, everything closes down. The banks, schools, state capitol, everything will close down with an inch or two of snow. So I feel sorry for them with 13 inches. It's like Antarctica, you know, down there now. You should see those people. Now that we've been up here, and you go down there, and I mean, they're just like maniacs when it comes to snow out there. I remember a picture that came in a newspaper article someone sent me from the south. This was, I think, we lived in Minnesota. It was a couple of years ago. And they had like 6 inches of snow then, and it was a shot of this street called Shelby Drive. That's a major street in Whitehaven where I was raised. And there were 50 cars within a mile, 1 mile, 50 cars that pulled over to the side, and the people just got out and walked home. 6 inches of snow. And in 1 mile, there are 50 cars parked on the side of the road. I mean, and they've never heard of snow plows. You got to rent those from Detroit or Buffalo or something, you know, to get them down there. And if you have them, nobody knows how to operate them or drive them. Just plow over all those cars, I guess. But some of them were demolished. 50 of them sitting there. Where are you going to put the snow then as you plow? Oh, it's really amazing. You ought to see people try to drive down there. I mean, here, the other day, I took a corner really sharply, and the car started spinning. So you just go the opposite way, and it was just fishtailing, zoom, zoom, zoom. Cars were passing me, and I really took the corner too fast. I was just smiling the whole time. I knew it was going to straighten out eventually. You know, I wasn't concerned about it. I fishtailed at least a half a dozen times, to the left, then to the right. When it finally grabs the pavement, you know, it sends a message up your spine that the car's got hold of the pavement now. Down south, you know, it's like 2 miles an hour. And if there's ice there, just stop and walk over, pull your car over the ice, and get back in it when you get on the other side of it. Here it's like a challenge. Just see what the ice can do to this car, this driver here. I can handle this. Just let it fishtail. I'll correct it sooner or later down the road. So now when you go back down south, if you're in the wintertime, you're an experienced winter driver, and, you know, people want you to drive then. That has happened. Well, it's cold outside. What is it, 29? Let's see. I think we'll let you drive today. It might snow on the way there. The biggest snow that we ever had was, I remember, in 1968. I think we had about a foot or a foot and a half then. I remember that vividly. 1968 was a big March. It was the beginning of March, of all things. We had a snowstorm, and Mississippi and Memphis, and it just stopped everything. And we children, we couldn't believe the amount of snow. I mean, 1.5 feet, that was a lot of snow. And drift, 3 feet. We had a field day with that snow. And when I heard they got 13 inches, I thought, that's, I guess, a 20-year cycle then. That was 20 years ago. Wait 20 more years and you'll have another foot of snow down there. Well, what I wanted to conclude with was this. Christians have the difficult job of having to live in 2 worlds at once. That's what makes it different for us than others in our culture. You see, we are touched by all these influences around us, through advertisement, through mass media, through education. We're touched by all of that. But yet we've got to resist what is unscriptural in that and continue to live the Word of God. And then think of it like this. People out there in the world, they don't have to do anything to get their worldviews, just live. Your world will give you its worldview. It's a gift to you. Just live in society. And here's what's different. Now you have to meditate on this for a moment. The Christian doesn't have anywhere where he just gets his worldview. I mean, just by living somewhere. You don't just get it by living. It's something that, intellectually and spiritually has to be picked up from the Word of God. That's a lot more difficult than just say, well, I don't have to think or anything. If I just live, if I just go work down at Sears Roebuck for the next 20 years, I'll pick up my worldview. That's all I have to do, just go work. And you'll pick up your worldview. The Christian worldview doesn't come that way. The Christian worldview comes by revelation. It comes by study. It comes by discipline. Think of that. You don't have to discipline yourself out there in the world. We're always calling for that here in this church. Discipline in our lives. You have to be a Christian. You don't have to be disciplined out there in the world. If you can make it out of bed and get to work on time and get your bills paid at least within 30 days after they're due, then basically you'll survive in this world. You'll never live as a Christian that way without a lot of good, strong discipline in your life. And around this time of year, well, really a few days ago, a few Americans, and they're not many, a lot of them pay lip homage to it, but a few Americans will get serious about the upcoming year and make what we call New Year's resolutions. But of course, they don't have the power to keep them, though, do they? I don't make New Year's resolutions, but whenever a new year comes, it is a year in God's history of the world. It is a new year, and I think seriously about it. And so I don't call them New Year's resolutions, but in, reflecting on my past life, whenever 1988 came, and if you haven't done this, I think we're early enough in the month for you to do it, then I decided these are some of the things that I want to accomplish this year. This is how and where I want to change in my life. I know one thing I said to myself is I want to be more organized. And I'm an organized person. I said I want to be more organized. I want to have everything perfectly in order to save myself time. And I had some other things that I thought of. If you haven't done that, you ought to. Somehow, whenever a new year comes upon you, it gives you the power to think about matters like that. And then if you're a Christian, then hopefully God will enable you to do those things as well.